right, so Oliver, thank you so much for joining us on the Proof of Words podcast. Before we get kicked off, maybe if you'd be so kind as to do a quick introduction of yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself for our audience.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Thanks for having me. And my name is Oliver. By education, I'm an industrial engineer, studied at University of Hamburg. But after I got my master's degree, I decided to become an entrepreneur. I also fell into the Bitcoin rabbit hole during my studies, and I was sure, okay, I needed to work in this space somehow. So then I decided.
So what was your? What was your engineering degree in? It was in, I assume, something sort of related to manufacturing or.
Yeah. So it's industrial engineering and management with an emphasis on product development. So a lot of CAD, like drawing, even 3D printing. Like things you can touch. Actually, not what I'm doing today.
Okay. So for somebody that has their background, at least from an educational side, 3D printing is an incredible technology, and it's amazing technology. I mean, what allured you to the Bitcoin or the crypto space rather than pursuing a career with something that is potentially equally as disruptive of a technology?
Yeah, sure. I'm a huge nerd, and as soon as 3D printing became a thing back in 2015, 14 or so, the first home 3D printers, you can build them yourself, and that's how I got hooked. I was like, okay, I can actually think of something, design it, and it becomes real. So that was very fascinating for me. But I discovered Bitcoin a few years later in 2016, around that time. And that was even more fascinating to me because Bitcoin is just like a really well-oiled machine, and it has so many layers. And I don't have to explain it to you, but the more you fall into a rabbit hole, the more you find out it's even deeper. It goes even deeper, and
Well, so what was so alluring about Bitcoin to you? I mean, obviously, it had to be something that really spoke to you to give up a career in what's a very promising tech industry to go completely down that Bitcoin and crypto rabbit hole.
Yeah. So, I was always interested in like our monetary system a little bit. Even when I was just 14, 15 years old, I started reading
you really are a nerd, aren't you?
Yeah. So I started reading about how it works because I was super fascinated by the fact I was like, okay, this whole interest rate thing, like how does it work? Because when you think about it intuitively, which I do most of the time, you would think, okay, the higher the interest rate, the more payments of interest happen, the more money there is, and it should actually lead to an expansion in money supply, and therefore should be related to inflation. But the opposite is the case, yeah. So the higher the interest rate, the less money is there. And it was so counterintuitive, and it's counterintuitive to a lot of people. Even like if you watch some of the world leaders like Erdogan, he is even still convinced that raising interest rate is actually expanding the money supply, but it's not. So I was like, what is going on there? Like, why is this not making sense in my head? And when I first found out about how credit is actually created, I was like, this can't be real. Like, because then it all fell into place, and I was like, oh, sure. Like the interest rate, like determines how much new credit is created, and credit is basically money printing. If you want, if you want to look at it this way. So I was like, yeah, finally it makes sense. So I
think it was JP Morgan himself that said the only money is gold and everything else is just credit. And I think you hit the nail on the head. That's really all the fiat monetary system is at the end of the day. I mean, if you even look on a dollar bill, I don't know if they actually have it on the euro, but the dollar bill is nothing more than a promissory note from the Federal Reserve, from the Treasury, right? It isn't actually, from a fundamental standpoint, money. Now, we use it as money. It used to be genuine money when it was physically backed by gold, or at least we had to trust the Federal Reserve that there were enough gold reserves to back how many dollars there were in circulation, similar to most other currencies in the world at the time in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, the post-war era. But after they went away from that and went to the fiat system, I mean, money becomes I mean, it's frankly worthless. It's not even worth the paper that it is theoretically written on, because it effectively is backed by nothing. It's just printed credit.
Yeah. So you were asking if we have something like this note is legal tender, blah blah. On the euro bill, we don't. There is only usually a signature of like I don't know, Lagarde or another high-ranking central banker, and that's all. That's all it needs.
That's even worse than a promissory note. You just have the trust of a signature of a corrupt politician.
So coming back to the topic, that's why Bitcoin was like the missing puzzle piece that I was so happy to find, because then finally everything started to make sense. And you wouldn't believe, I was talking to people that are like 20 years older than me. They're like in their 50s, and they have been financial advisors the whole year, like really deep into this whole banking business. And I told them about this, like how money is created through credit, and they were like, "No, that's not true. Like, I can't believe that's actually what's happening." I said, "Yeah, that is happening. Like, look it up." And they wouldn't believe me. Like, people that spent their entire career in this field don't know how money is created. And that was such an eye-opener for me.
So I think over the last 2 or 3 years, because of our global governance response to COVID, which was basically, okay, we're going to have stimulus packages, we're going to print money, we're going to inject money into the system, so our economies theoretically don't collapse, because we were stupid enough to shut the whole thing down. I think people have kind of woken up to that fact, particularly in the West, because this is the first era in modern, I don't want to say in modern history, but this is the first real era in the last 30, 40 years, ever since the 80s, that we've actually had to deal with inflation in the West. I mean, we haven't really had it in Europe for some time. We didn't have it in the United States for an even longer period of time. And 2 to 3% inflation, which is supposedly the targets that the Fed and the ECB go for, I mean, that doesn't, anyways, like the rates are completely off from what CPI and what other publishers put out there from what they claim it is. They manipulate that data. They manipulate the calculation constantly to keep it look lower than it truly is. So just double or triple whatever number they put out there. But nonetheless, a 2 to 3% inflation rate doesn't really hurt you on a year-to-year basis. You only start to see the effect of a 2 to 3% inflation rate after a time horizon of, let's say, 10 or 20 years. But all of a sudden, when you have 5%, you have 10%, which realistically aren't very high rates. I mean, we've had rates significantly higher historically in the West. And I mean, interest rates in the 90s and 2000s were basically where interest rates are today, 8 to 10% on a mortgage, right? It's not unheard of, and it's not anything that is not unsustainable. But given that this has popped up so quickly, so exponentially quickly, the populace and banks just haven't been prepared for it. And that's why this is a bit more of a crisis than throughout history whenever we've seen rates like this. So I do think that people are starting to wake up to that. And I for instance, I know from a conversation I actually had with my mom earlier this year, she did not know that the dollar was not backed by gold. She just thought the dollar was backed by gold because that's what she grew up with. That's what it was like when it was.
That's what you would assume, right? I mean, yeah.
Exactly. You ever see those videos of like comedians, or I don't know, I guess some of them are TikTokers or Instagrammers, and they like go and they walk around the city and they just randomly interview people and they ask dumb questions and they get really, really dumb answers. Like sometimes people will go out.
Yeah, sometimes I watch that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're pretty funny, and obviously they pick and choose. I mean, if they interview 100 people, maybe only 2 or 3 of them give an outrageous answer, but those are the ones that go on the TikTok, right? Yeah. I hypothesize if you went out, like if I went out today on the streets of New York with a camera and I recorded myself interviewing just random people around that UN conference, I can promise you more than 50% of those people probably believe the dollar is actually still backed by gold. I mean, wouldn't you agree?
It makes sense. I mean, the central banks have enormous amounts of gold. Like, what are they for if not to back the currency? Well, probably there's a different purpose for that. Yeah, it's super interesting. I think was it Henry Ford who said if the people understood our monetary system, we would have a revolution before tomorrow morning, something like that.
Did he say
I don't
something
know.
like that?
I don't know if it was him, but I think it was. Yeah.
I wouldn't be the least bit surprised. I mean, if people genuinely understood how money is created and how money is used and how money comes into circulation, and again, I think people are now starting to wake up to the fact of how it is worked. I do believe that we would see a revolution. And I think that Bitcoin is one of the key centerpieces of that revolution. Now, do I think that we're going to go away from a fiat currency system anytime soon? No. I don't think if you're a Western government, I don't think you can, mainly because you need the ability to print money to fight wars. Like if you go into a war and you're already severely in debt, you don't have the ability to, I mean, maybe you have to bring in more soldiers, you have to purchase new equipment, etc. I mean, a war effort is trillions and trillions of dollars nowadays. And we can argue till we're blue in the face if that money is just laundered or if it's used for other nefarious purposes. But let's just assume all that money is used for a genuine war effort. That's one of the reasons why in the 70s, I personally believe they had to go away from gold. They needed to fund the war effort at the time. I mean, do you see any future where we can go back to a standard where hard assets are backing central bank issued currencies?
Like with a good startup pitch, you need to start with a problem first. A lot of Bitcoiners too, they start with the solution first. So they were like, hey, study Bitcoin. Yeah. I mean, it's a good approach, but people don't understand what's wrong with their money right now. So we need to start there in my opinion. And yeah.
So how do you get that message out? Because at the end of the day, like, okay, fine. The objective that you and I would maybe have is that we genuinely push for Bitcoin or another hard asset alternative to back the fiat currency that is issued by a government. I mean, it wouldn't be fiat currency anymore. It would be a basket of assets or gold backing the dollar, backing the euro, whatever it may be. But while that is the primary objective, perhaps it might not even be the objective, but if we assume that's the primary objective, how do we speak with people? How do we educate people? How do we reach people to help them see the problem? Because my experience is that people are often very reluctant or just flat out reject the idea that the dollar, that the euro is not real money, that it's not money that, because I mean, they can use the dollar, they can use the euro everywhere they go. They get paid in the dollar and euro. How do we convince them that this money is in fact poison?
Yeah. So, I mean, if someone told you, hey, this thing, this paper bill that you worked for all your life, it's actually worthless and someone else can create it by pushing a button, and you work 40 years, 40 hours a week, to achieve these paper bills, and someone else just creates them, yeah, in unlimited quantities if they want to. So this is like something that you really need a strong, a strong personality for to even shoulder this, because it's basically telling you, hey, you've been cheated on your whole life, and good luck with with the rest of it, right? So this is hard to handle for most people, and I think so most people have a good sense of justice, right? So they say, okay, if I need to work and sacrifice my time to achieve, to get money, to get a job, and then to receive these paper bills, and someone else doesn't need to work to get the same paper bills, then this is maybe a vector that you can argue and be like, okay, this is not fair. We need to do something about this to make it more fair, to make it a level playing field, right? So this is something that you could start with, but most people are really not ready for Bitcoin, unfortunately. I can tell you maybe an example.
Not only are they not ready, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head. They're fundamentally not ready to leave their governments or their central banks issued currency. I think that maybe this is the root of the problem. People just are cognitively not ready or psychologically not ready to admit that the dollar, the euro, whatever currency it is, may be broken. And therefore, I need to step into an alternative. But it's interesting because if you look at more emerging economies, Argentina, Venezuela, a lot of African nations, Southeast Asia, where, okay, there's one extreme example of hyperinflation there, Venezuela. There's another example of extreme inflation, not hyperinflation, but Argentina. I think Argentina's interest rates recently got hiked to like 118% or something like that.
Yeah, but it's still below inflation, right?
Exactly. Still significantly below inflation. But what's interesting is, do you know what the solution is for a lot of people in those areas? It's not necessarily Bitcoin. It's Tether. It's stable coins. They're using stable coins like Tether and Circle because, okay, fine. You know what? I admit I'm willing to accept that my currency is fundamentally flawed. It's broken, right? It just is. However, I am not willing to admit that the overall construct of fiat currency, like the US dollar, is not broken. I mean, is there a bit of cognitive dissonance there that people just psychologically are not able to come over?
So maybe it's so there's certainly a little bit of sunk cost fallacy in my opinion. So if you like, as I said, if you spend your whole life working for fiat money, someone tells you it's worthless, you're like, well, but then my life was basically wasted in a way. So I'm not gonna believe that. But you hit a really good point here. My startup that I'm building currently, Basenode, we are actually tackling exactly this problem. So a lot of people, especially in countries, so my favorite example is always Nigeria. Nigeria has more than 200 million people. Yeah, it has a lot of people, and they're all young. So it's not like in Germany where the demographics look like this. So a lot of old people, and they go into their pension soon, but very few younger people. Nigeria is like the opposite, right? You have very few old people and a lot of young people that are very tech affine. They're also affine to holding cryptocurrencies. Therefore, so this is one of our major markets actually for Basenode. And what we do is we decided, okay, these people like Nigeria, Argentina, even Turkey, they have horrible fiat currencies. Yeah, so you cannot really build wealth when you're working there. Lots of freelance workers there, lots of young people.
I'm not sure what the inflation is in Nigeria, but isn't Turkey like 30-40% right now, something like that?
Yeah, last year I think it was 80 or something. But I mean, these are really numbers anyway. So probably much higher than that. And so you cannot really save for your future. So our typical customer or user at Basenode is someone who is, for example, working to finance his studies at the university. They're doing a remote job, coding, designing something, whatever. Yeah, because that's very common there, and they get paid in cryptocurrencies. So they get paid in Tether, they get paid in US dollar coin. On Ethereum, on Polygon, on any of those networks. Yeah, Binance Chain is also very common, surprisingly. And more than 90% of the invoices that they create. So our software is basically the main use case is to create invoices to get paid in cryptocurrencies and stable coins. More than 90% of those invoices are denominated in stable coins. And this allows these people to have the chance to actually save for the future, to hold a fiat currency that only inflates by about 10% per year or so, not by 100, which is a huge difference for them. And
I mean, if you think about that, let's just say, okay, you live in an economy. Let's just take Nigeria. And like I said, I don't know the inflation rate in Nigeria, but let's just assume
me neither. But
let's say it's 50%. We can even just use Turkey as an example. Let's say the inflation of the Turkish lira is 50%, which is actually less than 80, but let's keep the math simple, right?
Yeah.
And you earn $10 a day or something like that, right? If you earn $10 a day, you're working 40 hours a week, you work 40 weeks a year, you're earning something like $40,000, right? I think my math's right there, right?
Yeah,
let's just assume it is. Let's assume you own 40,000, or let's keep the math simple. You earn 50,000 lira a year. Well, if your inflation rate's 50%, that 50,000 lira that you earned is really only worth 25,000 lira by that time next year, compounded again, and it's only worth 1/4 of what it was before. So just over a 3-year time horizon, assuming your salary remains stagnant, you've lost 75% of your purchasing power, as opposed to if you just go to Tether. I mean, let's just assume the dollar, keep math simple, inflates 10% a year. So you receive 50,000 lira worth of Tether year one. Okay, inflate it, it's worth 45,000 the next year. Inflate it again, another 10%, it's worth 40,500. The difference in your purchasing power is the difference of roughly 40,000 lira relative to 12,500 lira. I mean, that's a massive difference. It's quite literally almost 4 times as much money. So I get why people are willing to accept the inflation rate of the dollar. The dollar just is much more stable. The euro is just much more stable.
It's the king of fiat.
It is the king fiat, for better or for worse. It's the king fiat right now. I guess that's why they call it the global reserve currency. But at the end of the day, do you not see that this still does not fundamentally solve the problem? For me, that looks like, okay, we're putting a Band-Aid on the dam because that's a good short-term fix. My fix is if I live in one of those economies, I'm going to get the US dollar. And you know what? That's a good fix for me. It's going to sustain my life. I'm going to maybe be able to retire at some point in the future because everything's in Tether, everything's in the dollar. But it doesn't fundamentally solve. It solves that microcosm of a problem in the vacuum for that one individual. And maybe it does for thousands, millions of them in that economy, but it doesn't actually fundamentally solve the problem. If anything, it makes the dollar more powerful. It incentivizes more dollars potentially to go into circulation because now the dollar has more velocity, and it therefore creates more of an incentive to print more dollars, therefore making the dollar worse overall. So if you're an American, you don't necessarily want people maybe using Tether in these jurisdictions because it just compounds the issue with the dollar, perhaps. I'm just trying to think about that. I've never thought about that before. But
it makes sense what you're saying. But I think you missed out on a few other aspects. So you're coming to this problem from the inflation perspective, and it's completely right. And that's the biggest problem. But there are other problems that we can actually solve by holding Tether instead of your local government currency. So I was having a lot of interviews with people in these emerging markets that are holding cryptocurrencies and stable coins in order to get to know my target group better. And some people told me that, okay, it's not just about escaping inflation a little bit. It's also about your bank not being able to withhold your funds because in some countries, so let's take Argentina. Every 10 years or so, they have a currency reset, basically, where they say, okay, we printed too much. Let's start fresh. And they issue a new currency. I mean, I'm oversimplifying things, of course. But
don't they just take a few decimal points off the end? So like if you have something peso, like that 1,000 peso is now worth 1 peso or something like that.
Right. But so if you have, for example, a foreign exchange account and in Argentina, like you're holding dollar with your Argentinian bank, you know what they will do in this event? They will just convert all your dollars. They're not asking you, convert them into the new Argentinian shitcoin currency, that they're printing. So this is a kind of, I want to say almost theft, but so this is one problem.
A lot of people would argue inflation is theft.
Yeah. So and another problem is I was talking to a freelancer from India in a one-on-one interview, and he told me that it happened to him multiple times whenever he receives payments from another country. So let's say someone from Germany hires an Indian freelancer and we pay them 1,000 euros. So this money is then sent to India, and the Indian bank sometimes decides that, you know what, we're going to freeze your account and we're going to send you a survey, and now you're going to prove to us where you actually got this money from, what's the purpose, what you want to do with it. And in this time, they cannot access their own money that they earned. So the blockchain.
Is that an AML issue that they have? Like they just want to make sure the money is not being laundered from somewhere, or what's the reason?
Yeah, sure. But imagine not being able to withdraw any money for like a couple of days even. Yeah, you need to buy food. You need to survive. So this is a huge problem for those people, and this is something that the blockchain, I mean Ethereum, Polygon, and so on. They actually solve this problem because no one can censor these transactions. If you hold your own key, I can send money to India right now in a few seconds and no one can stop it, right? So this is like another perspective on this problem. It's not just inflation, it's also monetary repression that you can escape when you hold your money on your phone, basically, and hold your own private keys.
Exactly. And I mean, at the end of the day, I think fundamentally most people can logically agree that, okay, there has to be some level of AML enforcement in the banking system. Like nobody wants to end up seeing terrorists getting financed or money being laundered to avoid taxes. Or, I mean, I don't know, maybe I do want to see that because I think taxation is theft anyway. But regardless, nobody wants to see what laws are agreed to be in place are broken. But AML seems to have gone just completely off the rails to the point that what was perhaps a well-intentioned structure to help stop terrorist financing or to help avoid theft or taxation or misappropriation of assets, like what was maybe in good spirit, good faith drafted as AML laws, it seems like as though it's just become completely bastardized, where nowadays these laws pose such restrictions on banks, and therefore banks have to impose such severe restrictions on businesses and individuals. I mean, I think we have to sit down and actually really rethink these laws, because now, whether if it was intentional or not, we can't argue that these laws haven't become completely off base and borderline tyrannical for exactly the types of points you just made there.
Yeah, sure. And so I also agree. I agree that we need to rethink AML policies probably, and I don't want to blame the banks per se. As you said, it's more. I think it's more coming from the regulators than the banks.
I would agree.
So maybe another point. So I'm in my startup. We're using all these. Bitcoiners would say shitcoin blockchains. Yeah, Ethereum, Polygon, and so on. And I wish we could actually use the best blockchain, which is Bitcoin, in my opinion. But people want stablecoins. They want virtual dollars. They don't want Satoshis. Like if I look at the statistics, as I said, more than 90% of invoices are in stablecoins, not in Bitcoin, even though we are offering it. Very, very few people are actually want to get paid.
Well, if you look at the daily transacting volume of Tether versus Bitcoin, you can see what moves the most. And granted, Tether is inflated because Tether is the on-chain, or whatever you want to call it, trading pair that's usually used for Bitcoin, Ethereum, etc. And I don't know if maybe Chainalysis or Glassnode has this information, but I would imagine that if we look at just pure remittances or payments being made, I would imagine Tether's volume of remittances far surpasses Bitcoin for the time being.
Probably, yeah. So
I mean, what are the statistics that you have internally? I mean, is it like 90-10 on base node, or is it more in favor of Bitcoin? Is it less in favor of Bitcoin?
It's about 90-10, but we have a small sample size. So we have about 1,000 users. We're a very small company. So it's not really
in the web, right? I mean, 1,000 people's supposed to be statistically relevant.
Yeah, maybe, but like for a company, it's not a lot. So I wish I could actually send stablecoins on Bitcoin. Like I know that there are some people working on it on the Lightning Network.
Yep.
So this is something that I really wish we could do. But then still, a lot of these people have wallets that use Binance Chain or that use Ethereum. We did interviews with people in Nigeria, and we asked them, hey, okay, you get paid in Tether on your phone, but what do you actually do with it? Like, can you actually buy stuff in your local supermarket with it? Or like how far is the distribution already there? And that was last year that we did this interview. And it turns out you can actually pay your landlord, like your rent, in many places in Nigeria already with stablecoins.
I believe
which is amazing. Yeah, so they're really working on like a parallel monetary system almost, which of course is very bad for the local government because they need someone to hold their local currency. It's nice for the people.
Well, so there's two things you can do there if you're the local government, right? The stupid thing to do would be to ban Tether, to ban Bitcoin, to ban these alternatives because, and I say the stupid thing because you can't stop crypto, you can't stop Bitcoin. Like it's coming for you irregardless of whatever policy you have. There's nothing you will ever be able to do to stop cryptographic technology. It's censorship resistant. That's one of the benefits of it, right? A lot of governments may end up trying to do so. Like I think, was it Nigeria or was it Kenya that's already outlawed WorldCoin? Or
I'm not really sure, but I think it was Kenya, probably.
I think it was Kenya too. Now that I think about it, but anyways, so the Nigerian government then is faced with two choices: you either have to embrace this or you outlaw it. I would argue it's better to embrace it, and you have to find a way where your own currency can exist cohesively with the Tether, with Bitcoin, and maybe that's by backing your local currency with Tether, backing your local currency with Bitcoin. I mean, a lot of governments around the world back their own currencies with dollar reserves, right? Israel does it. The Israeli shekel is largely backed by US dollars by the Israeli central bank, right? So maybe that's a way that you can embrace that new technology. And instead of having it throw your local currency out of whack because nobody uses what is the Nigeria currency? Is it lira?
And I think it's called naira.
Naira, okay. So rather than throwing the naira out of whack because nobody uses it, nobody holds it, there's no velocity or savings in it because of Bitcoin or Tether, rather you make it more stable, you make it more sustainable by backing it with those technologies, by backing it in your central bank with those assets, right?
Okay. I don't know. So I think, why wouldn't you just use the real thing is like my question basically. But like,
well, okay, so I guess that's the third option, right? You just get rid of it.
I'm not sure if bad money and good money or sound money can coexist permanently because I'm sitting, so you know where I'm sitting right now? I'm sitting in Berlin in the very center, right next to Checkpoint Charlie. So this is where the GDR and the German Democratic Republic were divided. Yeah, I'm very close to that point. And, there was basically almost free market capitalism existing next to socialism. Yeah. And for me, it's a little bit like Bitcoin existing next to fiat money. So, of course, they kept it going for like 40 plus years, something like that. But in the end, it was so obvious which side was actually better for the people that they just couldn't stop the process, and they just, they had to give in to the better product in this way. And I see that I can't imagine that bad money and sound money can permanently coexist. They certainly can coexist for like a couple of years.
So what brings down the fiat Berlin Wall?
Yeah. I think it's a very slow process. So, as I said, it took like 40 plus years for the GDR to actually give up. And it will take probably decades for fiat money to actually disappear because it's a journey that every individual has to make. Yeah. Like maybe when you see that your neighbor who has the same job just is much richer than you are, you start wondering, okay, maybe there's something wrong with my money or something. I mean, everyone has this moment where they realize, okay, this one is better than that one. Option A is better than option B. But yeah, it just takes time. So I would argue that
getting David Hasselhoff out to the Berlin Wall with a sledgehammer is not going to do it this time then, huh?
It's not going to do it because it's a process that happens on an individual level. So it's no point forcing that.
So what worries me is that we're going to, CBDCs are another inevitability. Our central banks and our political leaders have realized the benefits and the merits of a CBDC. I mean, it's kind of fun. Crypto Bitcoin began as this cypherpunk degenerate movement outside the banking system, and it wanted more transparency. Very, very, very admirable. But by creating this transparent monetary system, which fundamentally I think we can all agree is a net positive, we've also created the ultimate tool for what could be fiat financial tyrannical control. Because now, I mean, you already had the IRS, the U.S. taxing authority, say that they want every Venmo or PayPal transaction over $600 to be recorded, right? They want you to disclose every time you transfer more than $600. It's inevitably going to be the case that that's going to be more than $100 and then $10, just because the IRS and their money grubbing ways, they're going to try to do everything they can to track every single penny every American ever spends so they can be able to finance the government, right? CBDC. I mean, we don't have to talk about the programmable elements of this, because that's just another horrifying dystopian nightmare when you loop that in. But when you just think about the transparency, and I don't want to call it transparency, but the complete lack of privacy that a CBDC will likely have from the government, from taxing authorities, from the central bank anyway, it's horrifying. And this is where I think you might be right that sound money probably should, over a course of a decade or so, maybe a little bit longer, replace unsound money, fiat money. But my concern is that the CBDC, because it will very likely be so convenient for users to have, the CBDC will be so, it will remove all privacy, where governments can completely observe everything that's financially happening at banks and on an individual level, which is what they want. That surveillance is something I think all governments inevitably want. I think that when you put those two together, the simplicity and the distribution that CBDC will have for local people, for individuals, plus the surveillance that it will have for three-letter organizations and governments, I see that as a massive threat that might tip the scale towards fiat over sound money, if it's implemented in a way that I unfortunately believe that it will be implemented in. And I could be wrong. Maybe fiat currencies will be open source technology. Maybe they will protect privacy. I would hope that is the case. I don't see that happening because I don't trust anything any fucking government ever does anymore. But I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's interesting. So the European Central Bank is working on a digital euro for quite some years now. And they were actually asking the people what they want in a CBDC or in a digital euro. And most people were like, well, we want something like cash, anonymous, easy to use and so on. And then they were like, okay, we can do this, but there's a maximum transaction size. But they were like, okay, this is a good direction, but maximum transaction size should be 3,000 euros. So you can only hold 3,000 euros, maybe in the future less, in your wallet, basically, in your CBDC wallet. And I mean, how useful is money like this? I mean, maybe it can replace cash at some points, but the process why fiat money and CBDCs are so successful is also because you can just give out gifts. Yeah, you can be like, oh, well, download the new CBDC wallet and you get 1,000 euros or 10,000 euros even. I mean, it costs nothing to create them. It's just a digit on a screen. So they can be very generous in the beginning to lure people in, right? And this is something that
that's the bullshit that WorldCoin tried to do. Oh, if you come scan your eyeball, we'll give you like what was it, $5 or $10 in whatever Sam Altman's shitcoin was, right? I mean, that's how they'll get people. Hey, open your wallet. Here's a free $10, or maybe it'll even go worse. Open your wallet and here's a free $1,000. I mean, it'll be like the COVID payments.
Right. But the difference is, so if you do this with WorldCoin, with some random coin that has no volume when it's trading, then you have to be careful. You can give people $10 maybe, but if you do more, they will exchange it for their local fiat currency, and your price will just collapse. But if you do it with the euro, which has a much larger volume, you can give everyone $1,000. And the government, I mean, in the pandemic they used helicopter money, so. Exactly. It already happened, but you can do it digitally on the phone. Yeah, you can track the location of people and so on, and it costs you basically nothing to convince everyone to. I mean, who wouldn't take $1,000 bucks or 1,000 euros for free. Yeah, just to download an app. I mean, yeah, sure. Almost everyone would say yes.
But I know better. I know what that will inevitably be used for. I mean, we've already started. I mean, at the end of the day, I think the term CBDC is a bit disingenuous because money is largely digital anyway. And of course, all money is issued by a central bank, right? The only non-digital money anymore is the dollars that are just used on a day-to-day basis for microtransactions largely. Like you can no longer walk into a car dealer and have $10,000 and use that as a 20% down payment on your car. You have to use your credit card. You just can't do that anymore. If you walk into a hotel and try to pay that hotel, let's say you're staying there for 5 nights, it costs $200 a night. You try to pay them in $1,000 cash. I can promise you, most likely, that hotel is going to reject that transaction because they reject large volumes of cash. I mean, cash really only can be used at the microtransaction level. And if you're anything like me, if you're standing in line at the Riva, the German grocery store, and you have some old person that's counting pennies or little bills in front of you, I mean, you just get annoyed with it anyway because it's not quick, right? I mean, so it's a bit hypocritical of me anyway. But I am just massively concerned that the capture that CBDCs will have and the convenience that CBDCs will have will outweigh its fundamental flaws, and that the lack of convenience of Bitcoin, which, let's just be honest, the user experience of Bitcoin right now, the user experience of crypto from not maybe your and my perspective, we're used to working with this technology, but even then, if I'm doing transactions and I have to send half a Bitcoin for a payment or something, it's still nerve-wracking to me.
It's super scary. Exactly, like you make one typo and it's all gone, right? So of course, right? Most people don't want that kind of responsibility. By the way, I was looking up in the Eurozone, we have a 10,000 euro maximum cash limit. So if you buy something like more, if you want to buy something for more than 10,000 euro, you should use electronic cash. And some countries even have lower limits. It's kind of similar.
So I think it's the same in the United States, but I can't say for certain. I know there is some sort of limit, but just generally speaking, people just won't accept the cash. Like sometimes they just flat out reject it.
It's hard to check if it's real, right? You need this little machine and you push the bill through, and then I don't know, it might still be fake. Like every fiat money is fake.
So I remember when I was a kid, what used to piss me off. So every year for my birthday, ever since I was like 10, 12 years old, maybe, I forget. It was the biggest day of the year, my birthday, because every year I got a fresh $100 bill from my grandmother. Unfortunately, she stopped doing that. I mean, she's still around, but she stopped doing that maybe when I turned like 20 or something. And my first birthday that I just got a card from grandma and not that $100 was just very, very upsetting for me. But anyways, I remember getting that $100 bill. Now, wonderful. I can go out, I can buy myself a new toy. Maybe I can go buy myself a new bike. The reason I was upset when I turned 20, 21 and couldn't get that $100 bill anymore is because, hey, I couldn't go out drinking that night. But hey, that $100 bill, it was annoying as all hell to use whenever I would go and actually try to buy something, because more often than not, if you just go, and this was a long time before I could ever have a credit card or a debit card. I was too young. But I mean, a lot of retailers don't have the ability to give you change for that $100 bill, depending on whatever it is that you buy. And B, a lot of retailers just don't trust that $100 bill is real, and they just flat out reject you having it, right? Which is actually then very funny, because then I moved to Europe and learned that you guys have like this gigantic wampum-sized $500 bill, which just makes no sense to me whatsoever.
So the European Central Bank actually doesn't distribute the 500 anymore. So now the 200 is the largest.
Like a collector's item.
Yeah. I mean, they're still around. Sometimes you can come across. They're still valid. Yeah, you can still use them, but they're not issued anymore. So over time, they will disappear. Okay. Yeah.
They were purple, right? I remember I had one once. I went to the bank and I just withdrew $500, and it gave me a $500 bill once. And I remember it being purple. God, I didn't know they took it out of circulation. I would have kept it. I mean, that thing's going to be worth more.
You can still come across one. I mean, they're like, most people don't have them in their wallets because it's a little bit too much to carry around. But
I remember it was like the top of it was sticking out of my wallet because
they were huge
about the euro. that the dollar doesn't do. I like how actually, I don't want to say this. I don't like how they're different sizes. Like all the different euro bills are bigger depending on how big the bill is. But it's actually really kind of cool how they do that for blind people, so that they can feel the bill and they can tell exactly what bill they have based on how large it is. I think that's just a really cool thing.
Oh yeah, I haven't thought of this, but yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. So
supposedly that's why they do it, which is just interesting. Yeah. I mean, very well thought through.
So people want something that they can touch, that they can actually trust and look at, and not just something digital. I mean, exactly. This is something that we need to work on as Bitcoiners, that we need to improve.
So how do you make Bitcoin more tangible? For example, like my old company that I was CEO of, that I founded, Deutsche Digital Assets, we were one of the first groups in the world that got an ETP approved by a European regulator. We used BaFin, the German regulator, for a physically backed Bitcoin exchange traded product. It's the European equivalent of a Bitcoin ETF, right? And it's now trading on the Deutsche Börse and other stock markets. And we call it a physically backed Bitcoin ETF, even though Bitcoin is not physical, it's digital. But from a marketing and a branding perspective, at least from a German mentality, whenever you have those physically backed ETPs, they're usually physically backed by physical commodities, whether it be gold, silver, even sometimes dollars or Forex currencies are often used in ETPs, or it's crude oil, right? But we still call it a physically backed ETF, even though it's not physical, which is kind of funny because then people, I think German investors appreciate the marketing of that more because it's physically backed, but people ask, but Bitcoin's not physical. Why the hell do you call it a physically backed ETP? I mean, how do we create that tangibility for the average layperson to truly understand what Bitcoin is? How can they touch it? How can they feel it?
That's a very important question. So I think to have this, you remember this scenario was like a GDR being the fiat state, and then we have the German Republic with the Bitcoin state. So how do we tear down this wall faster? I think step one is make cryptocurrencies, especially Bitcoin, much easier to use than they are now. That's something that I also try with my startup. And the second point is make them, like you said, more tangible, something that you can touch. And there are some companies who go that way. I'm thinking of OpenDime, for example, which is a very small hardware wallet that you can basically, I think you can scratch off something and then the private key reveals. I haven't used it personally, but it's a very nice idea. So you can actually verify how much is on there by just scanning the public key. And if you actually want to spend it and not hand it over physically, like spend it digitally, you can just basically one time scratch something off, and then you have the private key, and then it's basically invalidated.
That's significantly better than my method of just putting a mnemonic in my head and hoping that I'll just remember the private key forevermore.
Yeah, I think it's more efficient. But I mean, you could do crazy shit. You can actually create coins and put little RFID chips in them, invisibly. So when you hold your phone against it, you can actually verify, okay, this coin holds, 10,000 Satoshis, or something like that. And then you can pass them on physically. So it's possible, but who would accept a physical Bitcoin coin that they need to scan with their phone to verify if there's actually Satoshis on them? I don't know. Most people are probably not ready.
If you optimize the user experience with that, the tech is already there. The tech exists. But if you optimize the experience where it's as simple as, I in Europe have N26 as my bank. I love N26. Simply, it's not the world's best bank, but for how simplistic its digital app is, it's incredible. I think N26 is an amazing
very strong mobile first approach. I also have an account with them, and it's actually really, really cool to use.
And it's cool that N26 is partnering with Bitpanda to make Bitcoin and other assets, crypto assets, available via the app. I think that was a very smart strategic move by Bitpanda, and obviously very smart by N26. Unfortunately, I'm an American, so even though I have an N26 bank account, they won't let me do the crypto on it. So I haven't been able to play around with that yet. I guess there's a IRS or a SEC risk that they see there, whatever it may be, even though I live in Europe. But nonetheless, you either have to create an optimal UI UX that people are not intimidated by the technology anymore. And I think that will help individuals better adopt crypto. But that goes without saying. That's rather self-evident. But I actually also think about it a bit in the opposite way, where instead of putting crypto in people's faces and enhancing the UI, the UX of the crypto, I mean, I can foresee a world. I mean, get rid of CBDCs. Let's assume that that does not happen. But I could see a world where the dollar, the euro, and all of these currencies do exist as they kind of are now. But the blockchain, or rather the protocols, the layer ones out there, Bitcoin, Ethereum, et cetera. And I hope it would be Bitcoin. I think it will be Bitcoin inevitably. But these become nothing more than the back end protocol ledger systems that process transactions denominated in the currencies that people are more familiar with, effectively having a Bitcoin-backed stablecoin of Tether, Circle, or whoever creates the first Bitcoin-backed stablecoin, the way that Ethereum, I mean, but not just on Ethereum, the way Tether is, but backed by Ethereum. So on Bitcoin, backed by Bitcoin. Because when you think about it, individuals, they don't, when they're engaging with an application, they don't care if the application's really an iOS or Android, or if they're on the web, that it's HTTPS versus HTTP or TCP/IP. And whenever they're sending a bank wire, they don't give a shit if it's Swift, Saba, or anything. And 99% of the population doesn't even know most of those letters that I just threw out there, right? They just don't. They don't care. The only thing they care about is the convenience of using that app, which Bitcoin and crypto just really doesn't have right now. It doesn't have that simple user experience. So while I could see your world playing out that way, where we enhance the user experience and people are now transacting in Satoshis, Satoshi becomes a viable alternative, I can also see a world where it remains the dollar, but the back-end processing ledger, the back-end protocol, is Bitcoin. I mean, whenever you're engaging with Bitcoin there, you just don't know it. You don't, like crypto becomes the back end layer of the global economy, but people just don't even need to know, or don't even care to know that it's crypto doing it. And I'm not sure if that's the more likely outcome. It might be, but that's maybe the outcome that I think I would lean towards to how that all kind of shakes out.
Yeah, it makes sense. So yeah, I mean, you just have to look at all those teens that use TikTok, and they don't know that there's like the IP protocol in the back and handling all the video.
They never heard of IP.
Yeah. So yeah, you see a grandma driving around in a car. She doesn't know how an internal combustion engine works. She doesn't need to. The car solves a problem in that particular moment for the user. It relieves a pain, and that's all that matters. And that's why people will use it. So now, what pain does Bitcoin really solve? I think it appeals more to people who think longer term. So that's why it takes so long to actually catch up, maybe. And so you can, of course,
to savers over the long term, like you said, because, like, for instance, let's just assume inflation's at 5% per year for the next 30 years. I'm 34 years old, and I'm hoping to retire by the time I'm 65. So let's just use exactly 30 years, right? I doubt I'll ever retire, but let's just use that as the base case. Most people retire in their 60s or 70s, right? So I save X amount of dollars a year. And let's say I plan on having $1 million by the time I'm 65 and retiring, just to keep the math simple, right? So I save $1 million over the course of that 30 years. But by the time I get to the point where I'm using that $1 million that I saved 30 years from now, I've had 5% compounding inflation. And I don't know the exact math of that, but that $1 million over that time horizon is probably worth less than roughly $100,000 today, right?
Yeah,
it's going to be at least a factor of 10% or a 10x less than what it is worth today. And I think over long time horizons, you can think about Bitcoin as being an alternative in that capacity. And certainly in emerging economies, as we touched on, where inflation is rampant, they understand this significantly more. I mean, I reference this book constantly on the podcast, Alex Gladstein's Check Your Financial Privilege. In the West, we're just not familiar with that concept because we, to your point, haven't hit mass pain of money yet. But maybe final thought. Do you see, or what is mass pain for the West? When do we have mass pain that we finally realize that the money is broken?
So, what do most people here in the West do? I mean, they are aware that even with 5% inflation, which I think is realistic, I mean, official numbers in the past decade were a little bit lower, but I mean, those are official numbers. So, what do most people do? I mean, they realize that they are slowly getting robbed basically by inflation. They buy real estate. Yeah, that's been the escape hatch basically from fiat money for most of the people here. So they buy real estate, and real estate in the past decade has performed perfectly fine. Yeah, almost 5-10% more every year in the price. So really nice. And the Max Payne moment is the deleveraging from this real estate bubble, which we are starting to see right now, at least here in Europe. In most German cities, prices are down already 10, 20, sometimes 30% from their all-time highs back in 2021. And the acceleration, I think, is what's happening right now, because if you look at transactions in real estate, they have almost come to a halt here. So very, very few transactions happening because the sellers, they still live in the pre-pandemic world basically and saying, oh yeah, but I do want €500,000 for this single family home here or something like that, right? In the middle of nowhere. And then you have no buyers for that, but they will just be like, okay, yeah, maybe it takes a couple of years. Someone will buy it, but I don't think someone will buy it with this interest rates that we have right now and with a looming recession. This will be a moment of Max Payne, I think, once people realize, hey, no one is buying my single family home for $1 million in the middle of nowhere. I have to lower the price if I need liquidity, and this can lead to a cascade of effects. So maybe that's the event
that will have massive contagion effects, exactly as you said.
Yeah, so I'm not looking forward to this, just to be clear. I'm not like, oh yeah, finally all these people getting deleveraged. No, this is like huge pain. And I want to live in a society where people around me are also wealthy, because it makes my life better as well.
Oh, agreed.
So I don't want them to lose a lot of money. But it seems that this might be coming in the next couple of years or even month. So yeah, very interesting to watch this. Mm-hmm.
So that's actually a very good point. I mean, so you think that, the straw that breaks the camel's back, if it were, might be this real estate bubble popping. So we've heard for a couple of years now that the real estate bubble would be popping. I mean, so I spend a lot of time in Frankfurt, right? And I mean, Frankfurt has, I think, even on a global perspective, among major cities, it's had like one of the top 5 asset price inflations for real estate just over the last 10, 15, 20 years, right? Frankfurt's just insane. And every year, like we've looked at buying houses over the course of the last couple of years, my wife and I, and every year we say, no, this isn't the year. Real estate's going to go down. It's inevitable, blah, blah, blah. And wouldn't you know it, every year it keeps going up. Okay, COVID happens. Oh, you know what? This is the year. Real estate's going to go down. We're not going to have to, we're going to be able to get a better priced house like what we want. But hey, it doesn't really happen. I mean, so when do you really expect this real estate bubble to pop? Or maybe a better way to ask this is, I mean, what makes it pop?
I think one factor is high interest rates. Yeah. So, and people can endure this for a couple of months, maybe even a year, but at some point you need liquidity. Like someone needs liquidity. Someone needs to sell.
Especially if you were stupid enough to have a variable rate mortgage. I don't know if you do that in Europe, but variable rate mortgages are pretty common here.
Exactly. Most people lock it in for 10 years. So at some point they have to refinance. And especially here in Germany, demographics. Yeah, as I said initially, we have so many older people and very few young people. And I read a statistic that here in Germany, the area, the square meter area per person is on the highest level ever. So a lot of old people basically have maybe a house, the kids already left, and they're sitting there having a huge space that they don't really use, but I mean, they don't want to sell it. And there's nothing wrong with people living on a lot of square meters. Don't get me wrong. But at some point, these people will go to like to a pension home or something, where they are taken care of, and a lot of real estate will come to the market again. And with very few young families here in Germany, there are not so many buyers for that. So I think there are a lot of effects.
Especially when a lot of young people, the other economic effect of this is young people have significantly less disposable income. They have significantly less savings because the cost of living is just so high right now. Rent is, I mean, I think I saw a statistic like the boomers and the baby boomers. I mean, they were paying something like anywhere between 12 to 15% of their income in monthly rent. And it was something like 20% on a mortgage, which is reasonable rates. That's perfectly fine. That's historically how it's worked in the West. Nowadays, rent is something like 30 to 35%. Mortgages are roughly about the same rate, if not 40%. I mean, it's absolutely crazy. So when you compound the fact of exactly what you're saying, there's going to be more inventory available as the older generations just pass. There's not going to be as much demand. I mean, there will be demand. People will want houses, but they're not going to have the liquidity. They're not going to have the dry powder to effectively purchase this because young people are existing in a world that has significantly higher costs of living than the older generations did.
Exactly. And this could lead to like, it's not just that real estate might come down a little bit in price, but real estate is often used as a collateral in banks. So if you use your single family home, for €500,000 as a collateral, and maybe you bought another apartment in a different city, which a lot of people do here in Germany. And at some point the bank comes to you and it says, well, actually now it's only worth 250,000 because the price came down a little bit in this area. It's not 500,000. So please recollateralize your single family home. And of course, most people can just, they don't have
you would have to buy out the equity of the home
around.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So what happens? The bank takes the real estate. The banks take the home, but they don't want to hold it. They will auction it probably, and they will get the liquidity from it. So there's more cascading effects around the corner. So
exactly, and whenever you have those defaults and the bank auctions, I mean those typically sell significantly less than what the theoretical fair market value is. And what's fun is then that becomes a new benchmark. It becomes a new baseline for the other homes in that neighborhood, the other homes in that area.
Yeah. It's like a row of dominoes.
Exactly.
Basically. Mm-hmm.
I mean, contagion from a real estate bubble burst is going to be very, very, very detrimental for the Western economy. You might have hit the nail on the head that will be the linchpin that sends this into free fall. And I think one of the biggest issues that Bitcoiners don't understand is, I mean, a lot of people think of Bitcoin as a risk-off asset, right? Or a risk-off asset where when other assets are failing, whenever the dollar is failing, the euro is failing, that Bitcoin is that safe haven. And while fundamentally, fundamentally, that's theoretically true. And I don't think it has been disproven. But what Bitcoin over the last couple of years has not proven is an ability to withstand macro environments, turbulent macro environments. I mean, if you're a hedge fund trader and you have exposure to Bitcoin in your fund as well as equities, and let's say you use assets as leverage, I mean, what's the first asset you're selling in a margin call? It's not going to be equities, which are less liquid than Bitcoin. The first, and it's also not going to be those that are less volatile than Bitcoin. You're going to try to protect your investors. The first thing you get rid of is the volatile asset. So Bitcoin likely goes first. Bitcoin significantly dumps in price because of it. And that's been proven to have been what happened over the last 2 or 3 years, given what happened from a deleveraging standpoint across all of the lending platforms and the over-collateralized funds in crypto. And as Bitcoin becomes more adopted from a macro standpoint, unfortunately, that's just a reality that we're going to have to live with, where Bitcoin in a vacuum does operate the way that we as Bitcoiners portray it. It is that inflation hedge. It is that hard money. It is that digital gold. But when you loop in others that don't believe in that, they just view it as a speculative asset and they trade it as the speculative asset, it kind of diminishes the value drivers that we all perpetuate Bitcoin to have. Oliver. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on the show. Unfortunately, I do have to get going. Like I said, I have that event over at the UN I have to go head over to shortly. But I'm going to definitely have to make sure we get you back on in the relative near future, because I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. And I want to learn a little bit more about Basenode, just because me being an accountant, I really would like to see a little bit more about the invoicing and accounting software. So we have to jump in.
Sure. Yeah, we haven't talked about this at all, but it's fine.
No, we were supposed to, but we didn't even get into it.
Sure.
Fantastic. Thanks for joining us on Proof of Words, Oliver. We'll chat soon.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Ciao.